Wamanjeka, welcome to Melbourne Conversations, the digital literacy gap. This event is part of the Melbourne Conversations series run by the City of Melbourne on the third Wednesday of every month. You can submit your questions throughout the event and we'll do our very best to answer them towards the end and throughout. Submit your questions by going to sli.do and entering the hashtag digital literacy. Or you can use the link or QR code that is now on your screens. You're also very welcome to subscribe to this Melbourne Knowledge Week YouTube channel to stay up to date with Melbourne Conversation events. On behalf of the City of Melbourne and my esteemed friends who are joining me on today's panel, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and importantly note that these lands have never been ceded. Also, a shout out and deep gratitude to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us online today. Digital inclusion has a significant impact on First Nations communities, so I'm hopeful we can shed some light on potential solutions today. My name is Jess Perrin and I have the great pleasure of being your host today. I work for a not-for-profit social enterprise called Info Exchange and lead our work in digital inclusion nationally. As an organisation with a mission to strengthen communities using technology to create positive social change, today's topic is very close to my heart. We also have an incredible group of panellists, experts in their own domain on digital inclusion, who we're going to meet and hear from in the next hour or so. But with no further ado, let's jump into it. Admirably, the City of Melbourne has a number of major initiatives in their council plan. And today we're going to focus on their goal to improve digital inclusion for all, particularly for vulnerable groups. Now let's start with what we mean by digital inclusion or digital literacy. I'm going to invite the true academic amongst the group, Professor Julian Thomas, who, among many other accolades, is the director of the RMIT University ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. And importantly, for great relevance today, is one of the authors of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. Julian, I understand there are 3 key measures to digital inclusion. Can you share with us what they are and why they're so important?
Sure, and thanks very much, Jess, for the invitation. It's great to be part of this conversation. It's very timely because in the circumstances we're in, coming through this pandemic, I think these issues have become more important than ever. As you say, digital inclusion, and it follows from that, I think, that digital literacy as well is a multi-dimensional problem. This is one of the reasons why it's challenging, why it's difficult, why it's taken us, many years, I think, to really address it squarely. But we do think that there are several key dimensions to digital inclusion. We think one of those is what we call access, people's ability to connect, whether it's in terms of access to devices, to data, which of course is absolutely essential, and access to connection infrastructure, whether that's through a fixed broadband connection at home or a wireless or mobile service. So access is really important. I think the second key one, and of course key dimension to inclusion, and of course this is particularly important for literacy, relates to what we call our digital abilities, our capabilities, our capacity to connect, and the confidence that we have in using the internet, the kinds of things that we can do online. And of course, they're changing, and the demands for our capacities and competencies online are changing all the time. The third dimension, which we think is also really critical, a big part of all of this is affordability. How much does a decent internet connection cost? And we look at that often in terms of the proportion of a household's income that we may have to allocate to a good internet connection. So, Jess, they're the 3 key elements. As I say, I think they're vital. Getting all of those things right is really important when we're starting to think about how we improve digital literacy and digital inclusion across the board.
Absolutely. Okay, so to our audience, we're remembering access, affordability, and ability. I'd like to bring in Elle Morell, who is the Community Development Manager up the road from many of us at the Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre. Elle, I have been privileged to hear and learn about some of the incredible work on the Carlton Public Housing Estate to promote and support diverse communities to succeed. Tell us, how big a problem has digital literacy been through our lockdowns and the pandemic, and have you seen it improve in the past year and a half?
Thanks so much, Jess. I just too would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Wurrung, on which land I'm sitting, and to their elders, past, present and emerging, and just acknowledge that they've got over 60,000 years of understanding communication. And I think as colonialists today, we're demonstrating we're still working out how to do that and include everyone. So yes, Jess, as you said, I'm really privileged to work with an amazing community at the Carlton Public Housing Estate. Introduce you to that community a bit to see where we come from in the work that we do. So basically, Carlton is actually like a tale of two cities. It's what is called a really unique patchwork effect, where you have very privileged and prosperity right next to disadvantage living side by side. So Carlton is actually ranked as the last CEFA index, which is the socio-economic index for areas in the City of Melbourne. So it's often not known. You think of Lygon Street and tourists, but there is a huge Carlton Public Housing Estate of over 3,500 residents there. And there's about 30% of those residents living below the poverty line on less than $300 a week, with about 48% being unemployed before COVID. So that's probably gone up quite dramatically now. It's a very culturally diverse community, with over 2/3 of people born overseas and 57% of people speaking a language other than English at home. It also has a significant Chinese, Vietnamese and Horn of Africa community, so from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia. So it's a very diverse community, but I think the thing that unites them is extremely low digital connection. So, Jess, when the lockdown hit, it was quite insane. People did not have computer, did not have the basic skills to turn on a computer and know what to do. So we're really lucky in Carlton. We have a great community of agencies and residents, including Maria, who's here today as a resident leader, from the local school to the church, the neighbourhood house. And basically, we jumped into action to try and address this digitally excluded community. And I talk a lot about three things: devices, data, and digital literacy. And I know today is about digital literacy, but for our community, we're sort of two steps back at that foundation of just getting devices into people's hands. So I'll go on a bit more as we go through today, but we've done a range of things in lockdown to get computers, including partnerships with Melbourne University using their end-of-life computers, and also doing advocacy around getting affordable data.
Elle, Elle and I got to meet last year for the first time during the lockdown, and I was just so impressed by the incredible community response of innovation and solving problems on the fly and doing the best that could be done to support community members to get online. Maria, I'd love to hear your view on this. Maria Ibrahim is a passionate community worker at CoHealth and a long-term resident of the Carlton Housing Estate, so has experienced what Elle has spoken about firsthand. Maria, we'd love to hear some of your experiences in the time over the past year and a half, and perhaps learn about some of the experiences of families who tried to adapt to homeschooling or working from home over the past year.
Yes, thank you, Jess. And really, like we know it from last year until now, how important the digital. After lockdown last year, a lot of big family, they struggle was, but finally they get some helping agency around them. As a mother, and when I was living in Carlton, I have 5 kids. So how about others? The family, they had 12 kids, 8 kids, or 5 kids with student studying in uni, student primary school and high school. So it was very difficult time was. Also, we online MyGov, now you can submit your application and stuff. We use in MyGov. So for everything, even for COVID-19 now, if you test or if you need any submission, we use that digital. So at that time, the digital stuff is very important, and we are some occasion now is a lot of changes happen in Carlton, about digitals.
I cannot imagine being a parent of a household with 11 or 12 students from, prep through to university, trying to each, get online to attend their classes. Was that resolved? Was that supported by the schools, or were there devices brought in to support those families?
In the school, also like what she mentioned about Melbourne Uni, a lot of laptop and computer they would used to give us. Also the digital Wi-Fi. Some family they get that. Sometimes the kids they using mother's telephone. Sometimes the calling come and when they are studying. It was very hard time really.
Yeah, I recall Daniel Andrews, our Premier, making a commitment that no child would be without a device in Melbourne. And Ella Maria, was that the reality? Once that was announced, did we see an influx of devices coming in to support all students?
In Carlton, the teachers did rang every family in primary school, and over 50% of them didn't have a device for their children. So they did try and get devices out, but they only had old ones for the school because it's mainly people from the housing estate there, so they don't have a lot of fundraising or high fees. So it was a really big delay. I know that Dan Andrews made that great statement, and James Molino, all schools are going to, have a device for every child that needs one. But on the ground, unfortunately, that didn't happen. And again, like Maria's, we have a really large families of, single parents with 9 children. And so getting a device for everyone was really challenging.
Absolutely. And I guess the reality of that logistically as well is a challenge when we're in lockdown and people aren't leaving their homes. It's a really difficult thing to capture. For those of you who may have just joined us and tuned in a few minutes late, my name is Jess Perrin and you are watching Melbourne Conversations, the digital literacy gap, as part of Melbourne Conversations series run by City of Melbourne on the third Wednesday of every month. You can submit your questions through this event. Please jump in if you have any early. I'm sure our panelists will be happy to answer them. You can go to sli.do and enter hashtag digital literacy, or you can use the QR code or link that is now on your screens. Of course, please subscribe to Melbourne Knowledge Week YouTube channel to stay up to date with Melbourne Conversation events. I'm keen to jump to you, Sam. I'd really love to hear your perspective on this. We've heard from Julian about the broad facets of digital inclusion, and that being access, affordability, and ability. And then we're hearing on the ground from Maria and Elle around that, even ability is a stretch at the moment. People don't have devices, and perhaps affordability is a challenge. As the program lead for Digital Rights Watch, your goal is to advocate to uphold human rights in a digital world. In some ways, it seems staggering that some households, particularly on government housing estates, don't have a fixed internet connection. Is that something you're focused on in your work?
It's certainly an area that we are definitely very interested in, this idea of connectivity and being able to access essential services and what that means for the sort of flow-on effects for other human rights and how we realize them online. So absolutely, it's totally something that falls within the remit of Digital Rights Watch. And as Maria said just before, increasingly this is becoming the default in how we access services, how we get health information, how we book an appointment to get a vaccination, for example, how we access Centrelink payments and things like that. And as more of these things are online by default, often there is an offline, version, but it can be really hard to access sometimes, or hard to navigate, or even to be able to see whether or not it is available. So as these things are more by default online, the issue of digital literacy and digital inclusion is becoming, increasingly a pressing issue, and I would say certainly a human rights issue. I think also when we're talking about connectivity and being able to, use the internet and digital technology, it also can help to support other human rights. So, things like freedom of expression or freedom of speech or freedom of association, all of these things are facilitated by digital technologies in our sort of modern society. So if you have a group of people who are left out of that, then it becomes really hard to even imagine how we can have like a free and fair society if this gap continues to be an issue.
Absolutely. And I think, in so much of all our work, and certainly the City of Melbourne Council plan, we're advocating for inclusion for everyone. The one question I have for perhaps this whole group is there a downside to digital inclusion? Is there something else we should be mindful of? I think we're hearing so much about scams and having the confidence to know what's right and wrong on the internet. Sam, is that a focus area for you? We're trying to balance both?
I mean, there are plenty of problems with the internet and with digital platforms and with, privacy and security. And I mean, earlier today, I was reading that Mark Zuckerberg in 2014 said that he perceives connectivity to be a human right, which, I think a lot of us would probably broadly agree with, but I certainly wouldn't be putting Mark Zuckerberg on a platform as like an arbiter of what is and isn't a human right and what is and isn't a good thing. We can talk about it more, but I think one of the sort of big issues with digital literacy that needs to be incorporated is this security element. I actually heard on the radio this morning, they were talking about the AECSC annual cyber threat report, and they were talking about how they have seen such quite a big raise of cybercrime reports over the past year, a lot of which are to do with, wanting to take advantage of vulnerable people across the pandemic, a lot of whom will have varying levels of digital literacy and digital awareness for cybersecurity and scams and phishing attacks and things like that. And I think that will be, I think that should be a really big part of when we think about digital literacy. It's not just about being able to get on and, use the platform and be able to access certain services. It's also about doing that in a safe and secure way. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think we have our work cut out for us, with inclusion. Obviously, that's something we're all aspiring to, but it needs to be safe and secure and protected. We have a couple of questions coming through on the chat, which I'm delighted to see. Thank you, everyone, for participating. For anyone who'd like to ask a question, you can go to sli.do and enter the hashtag digital literacy. Hello, Tom from Geelong. Tom has asked, I'm interested in how we can support or promote the work of the Digital Inclusion Index. Might be one for you, Julian. My region of Geelong has had low participation in the survey component of this. And thank you so much, Tom, for your question. And I do remember years ago, Geelong did rank particularly low, and certainly Info Exchange had a really fantastic opportunity to collaborate with the council down in Geelong, who have been really, I think, forthcoming and passionate about seeing that digital inclusion level raise across the Geelong community. So I know there is some great work happening on the ground. Julian, what can we expect from this year's Digital Inclusion Index? And do you have any, connections to Geelong from previous years as well?
Thanks, Jess, and thanks, Tom, for the question and the point. It's really what we have been trying to do with the index, to identify key areas where more work needs to be done, and Geelong has been one of those. A number of our regional cities in Victoria are in that category, but it's been really good to see the attention to digital inclusion and digital literacy that has started to happen in Geelong, partly we hope as a result of people becoming more aware of the issues there. We're about a month away now from releasing our next report with some new data about how we measure digital literacy and digital inclusion across Victoria and including in Geelong. So we'll see what that tells us, I guess there. It's been good to see improvements in Geelong over recent years across those several dimensions that I talked about across access and digital ability. Affordability, unfortunately, has stayed pretty flat, and so that is a real problem that I think we've got to address there and across Melbourne, the City of Melbourne as well. In fact, I think that's a huge challenge nationally for us. So more to come, and we hope, Tom, that our next version of the index will give you some richer insights into what is happening in Geelong and give you the capacity to work with our data more closely than ever before.
Julian, we are all excited about the launch of the next index. For us working in digital inclusion, it's a real baseline for us to think about where we can be focusing our efforts. And it's important now, I think, that I call out the work of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance, an incredible alliance with many of these people involved in it, which are working towards a national strategy from the government to address digital inclusion at all levels. We've been working very closely with the Australian government to inform and give ideas around what we can be doing at a national level to support digital inclusion. We've heard today at a community level, the response is, I think, just phenomenal. Elle and Maria sharing exactly how the communities responded with local libraries, community houses, neighbourhood centres coming together to support people. But what would it look like if we had a national commitment to digital inclusion and there was recognition around our need to drive and change digital inclusion across the country? That is where I think we're going to start to see the needle moved. So very, very excited to think about what that might look like. I guess a question to all of the group, and it's very hard not to think about digital inclusion in the context of the past year and a half. When COVID happened, digital inclusion was a headline for the first time, I think, in history. I've been working in this space for a long time in Info Exchange for over 20 years, and constantly the question was, what do you mean by digital inclusion? What do you mean by digital literacy? And all of a sudden, it was front of mind. And I think it's really hard to disconnect digital inclusion and health. We have people who are unable to leave their houses following enforced government orders. What does digital inclusion have an impact on health? Elle, what have you seen on the ground, and how is health and digital inclusion coming together more so than ever before?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think about the economic costs of this as well. So when people are not digitally connected, doing telehealth conferences in lockdown, so that puts an expense on our health budget in general because they present later with issues. In education, kids are getting behind because they don't have the data to do their homeschooling, or there's 6 people in one room trying to do their schooling and uni in different corners of the room. So there's really big costs that are being, delayed from what the actual figures are around digital inclusion. I also think in terms of health, people are like with COVID in lockdown, getting information to people who might speak a language other than English is very difficult because all the information, particularly at the beginning, was online, and just assuming that people had the devices, the data and the literacy to access them and find them. And then there was a big push to get those translated, but still getting them out was difficult. So in Carlton, we did a whole range of things to get people connected, and then we held resident meetings Carlton Public Housing Estate, and we would have over 80 people where we could have interpreters there, and just also access to ask the questions that are relevant to their health and their families. So yeah, I think it had a big impact on the COVID response.
It's interesting because I think, so much of incredible and wonderful community work has relied on face to face. I know certainly in some work that we've been doing over the past year and a half, we've been working to think about how we can improve digital inclusion in disaster prone areas, thinking about after the bushfires that were catastrophic here in the summer of 2019-20, there was evidence to suggest that people who weren't connected were actually worse off in the event of an emergency. So we pulled together an incredible project which was around conducting face-to-face kind of research, human-centred design with communities across Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. And all of that was about being in person and understanding from a community perspective how we could kind of change or think about solutions to address this challenge. Now, we are trying to work with and collaborate with people who may not have a device, who may not have an internet connection, or may not have the confidence to use those skills. The pivot to having to perform this work online or not do it at all felt just so impossible. And I guess chicken and egg, how are we meant to be engaging with a diverse group of wonderful people who have incredible experiences and input into this process when we're not even able to go and speak with them? And I think, when we think about that challenge across the entire community spectrum, we've done incredible work to pivot and innovate to try and address some of these challenges when we were somewhat behind the eight ball, knowing, from the index that digital inclusion was low in particular areas, and certainly that we see a parallel between low socioeconomic households and digital inclusion. So we were really kind of challenged, I guess, when COVID happened. We were not ready to respond. And I think, certainly there's a lot to be said around how impressive it has been, those pivot to health services online, the challenge for teachers to move to remote learning when they've done it before. People have really done incredible things, but we do have a ways to go. Maria, I'm interested from your perspective, what do you think, for the families that may have 12 children at home, what do you think helped most? What do you think supported that family, or what more can we all be doing to change this situation?
Maybe more literacy for I need to acknowledge Carlton Primary School, also neighborhood house, and this lockdown they teach a lot of mothers and online how they use basic term, and that lockdown they start in the neighborhood house learning center. So that has helped us also. That when you are in this stage, you don't have to go and see face to face the doctor. You need that communication face to face doctor in laptop or computer. The community need a lot literacy for the IT literacy. They need it also because suddenly this dynamic just came, so everything is new for some people, some family. They didn't use internet much, but when this thing has happened, a lot stress for the family. When the kids he didn't study, even if he didn't finish his homework or she didn't his homework, they become in stress. They don't want to involve more at the school online. So was a lot of back. The problem was time, but we are at the we get a lot of support from Good House and Carlton Learning Center.
Yeah, I think there's that real grassroots movement. You've got these incredible neighbourhood houses, particularly the one in Carlton, that is trying to boost the capability of people, again, where English is an additional language.
Second language,
Yeah, there is a need for us to be doing more with community to boost those skills. And there are a number of incredible programs that are working to address that. You think of things like the Be Connected program. If you're not familiar with it and you're interested in boosting your own digital skills, please have a look. The Library Network, Neighbourhood House Networks. At Info Exchange, we run a program called Digital Springboard, which are really focused on this kind of community literacy and working to support people to boost their skills tools so that they have a bit more confidence when they have to navigate these challenges. But, I feel like it's a drop in the ocean when we're thinking about these local community initiatives. What does that look like at scale? How do we make sure everyone's reached? How do we make sure it's going regional as well? And, that we haven't solved for. I have another question that has come through. Thank you, Travis. Really appreciate your input. Travis has asked, what are the biggest barriers in the digital inclusion context to engaging people in dialogue and democracy, and how can government address this? I think that's a really fascinating question. So we're thinking about digital inclusion in dialogue, democracy, and how can government address this? I earlier brought up the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance, which has tasked itself with this exact challenge, to be engaging all levels of government to recognise digital inclusion as a challenge. Now, what I would put forward is that digital inclusion in certain pockets is recognised as a challenge, but there isn't yet a united front for us to address that. Travis, if you haven't already, please do have a look at the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance website. You can sign up to events and kind of see what is being pushed forward. We have certainly had some traction at the federal government, who have been kind of looking to understand what we are trying to do. One of the things that we have proposed is a national digital inclusion framework. So how do we measure digital inclusion? How can we satisfy that nationally? Certainly Julian and the team behind the Australian Digital Inclusion Index has moved mountains for us to start measuring, but what might that look like at a national scale? I'd invite the panellists to respond if they have any thoughts as well.
I can talk again, mainly from a local scale, but just I think what Travis is also saying is how do we all have an input into this? I think Samantha's point on human rights, like if you just take it right back, the survival in the pandemic for many of the people we work with was just basic. I know I had internet connection and a laptop at home, and I had a work IT support manager, and I was still complaining that I couldn't do my yoga classes online. And I think it's about how do you get dignity for people to all have a device and be connected. So one of the things that Base was talking about that we've done is neighbourhood houses have joined together to form the Community Agency's Digital Inclusion grouping, and we also have a lot of allies with that. And one of the things we're calling for is supporting ACAN's campaign at 50 megabytes per second for $20. So that just is making a basic access to data that's affordable. We've also done things like partnered with Melbourne Uni to do research into data affordability for starting to do a case study at Carlton just to get basic research and information on this that we can then roll out. And as part of the work of CADI, we're approaching the federal and state ministers and just saying, what are you doing about the issue? And unfortunately, and sorry if there's anyone here from government, the answer we're getting back is, we know it's an issue, but we're not really doing anything. So we're looking at doing a budget bid in Victoria just to try and get this on the map and get this addressed, because otherwise we're back at square one all the time, and we complain about our yoga classes, but people can't attend health appointments or educate their kids.
Yeah, I think the affordability piece, and great to hear that you're advocating. So was it 50 megabytes per second for $50? Is that
$20?
$20, fantastic. I think, there's a real role, digital inclusion is not going to be solved by one party. It is not going to be solved by the government. We obviously need to be working with the telcos, which is what ACAN does so well, to influence how we can better support these needs. I know particularly Telstra released a wholesale price last year during COVID for a fixed period of time to enable more people to have home connections. But I guess the question behind this, what's the sustainability? What does that mean for people with or without an NBN connection, and how can we ensure that continues to come through? Affordability is a really crucial gap. And I think, Julian, you mentioned the index measures affordability, and it sounds as though we're not seeing an improvement in that space. Is there anything further you can share around why that might be?
Well, I think that there are a few factors involved, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen access, broadly speaking, improving, over the last 5 or 6 years. We've seen, people being able to get hold of more data, and we've seen better connections. That's partly come through the NBN, and it's also come through better mobile infrastructure. As we're saying, of course, there are still big problems on that access front in terms of people's access to devices and so forth, but access has improved. Ability's improved somewhat, although it's been lagging behind some of those gains. Affordability is one area where we are really concerned. And some of what happens there is, of course, the dynamic that we've been talking about. When we have something like the pandemic occurring, people need to use online services more. When governments decide that they are going to automate more and more of their services and their interactions with citizens, people are going to need to use more internet rather than less. That means that even though the price of data or the price of a laptop may look like it's declining, in fact, what we're spending on being online has not declined. And our analysis and our research, and I think this is reinforced by work of our colleagues with other projects, is that affordability is a significant problem. We think that ACAN's goal of making sure that everybody could easily afford a 50 megabit per second or better connection is the right way to go. We need to stop talking about a very basic sort of service. NBN, for example, offers a 12 megabit per second service. It's not really suitable. It's not designed for homeschooling or for working at home or the kinds of things that we now have to use the internet for. So we really have to move on to an understanding of what a basic good quality internet service would look like, and it probably is around that 50 megabit per second mark in order to do all of the kinds of things we have to do now, and to make sure that that is accessible and affordable for everybody, in just the same way that we expect that everybody should have access to a good quality water supply or something like that. As Sam says, this is pretty fundamental to all kinds of things, our participation in everyday life, our ability to express ourselves, our ability to participate in democracy, our ability to participate in online education and work and all of those kinds of things. So that's why affordability matters, and we think it's something which governments perhaps have lost sight of a little bit as they've concentrated on improving infrastructure and access. So it is a critical area for work. I think we'd really agree with what you've been saying, Jess, and others about the need for a coherent national strategy in this area. It's extraordinary and inspiring and amazing to hear about the things that people are doing at the grassroots in community organisations right across Melbourne and elsewhere in the country. And organisations like Info Exchange have played an amazing role over the years in that kind of area. But we do need
please
some
jump in
direction
if you
and
can.
Strategy.
Thank you, Julian.
I just want to add to Julian, I feel like there's an opening for my hobby horse. Data connection is an essential service. It's an essential service like electricity and water. There should be a concession rate on it as there are on your electricity bill. In a survey that was done last year, 76% of customers seeking payment assistance had a negative experience, and that's double for culturally diverse people. This is a huge issue, and telcos have extremely complex contracts. They should be in plain English. They should have really clear financial assistance guidelines, but ultimately we need recognition that it's an essential service and there has to be a discount.
Agreed. Sam, what do you think?
But I just wanted to hook into this idea of dignity, which Elle raised, and also this automation idea that Julian raised, which I think is really interesting, because while I think that it's really, really important that we have community-led programs and peer-to-peer programs, and I think that's where the bulk of actual change will occur. And I think that's really great. But I also think that it's not good enough to put this onto individuals and onto community groups to have to navigate this on their own, essentially, with very little support. I think that that's appalling. And I think that on top of that, you know, even is it enough to be like, here's a device, here's some internet, come online, here's how you, get onto, type in centrelink.com. Oh, wait, the entire system has been designed that is completely hostile towards most people. It's incredibly difficult to use. We're seeing more and more things, become automated and using automated decision making. Just recently, there's a bill that's popped up about, increasing and streamlining participation requirements, I think is what it's called, which raises all kinds of concerns in a similar kind of realm to robo-debt. So we know that these kinds of uses of technologies can exacerbate inequalities, and we know that those inequalities are, follow the same patterns as a lack of digital literacy, following like low income, low education, geographic location. So it just strikes me as something that is incredibly frustrating. Like, we need governments, as well as putting the effort into increasing digital literacy, to also not be using technology in a way that is actively hostile and exacerbating inequalities as well. Like, it needs to be both. I got really passionate about that.
No, and thank you. I think the example of robo-debt, and if some of our audience aren't familiar, robo-debt was an Australian government initiative to reclaim back some what was deemed as unauthorised welfare payments using machine learning. So it automatically took money from people who were paid Centrelink payments. And unfortunately, it was absolutely wrong in lots of respects and caused a lot of harm to people already doing it tough who actually didn't owe any money in return. It was an automated system rather than a human one. And I think this is a real risk when we talk about digital inclusion. There can be so many benefits, but they need to be carefully managed and mitigated to ensure that everyone, which is what we're talking about today, all communities are benefiting and can thrive online, not be put more at risk online. So we have a real challenge here. And I think, we have not yet resolved it. The government has not yet resolved it. And while we have these incredible things happening in the community, you are absolutely right, Sam. We cannot rely on community to constantly step up and band-aid challenges that are not being addressed at a federal level. So a really good point. We have a question that came in, which is audience specific, which is around youth and young people. So there's a lot of assumptions made when we think about the 2.5 million Australians that are not online. There is often an assumption that, they're all just older people and they're not wanting to get online. But increasingly, we are seeing that young people don't have the digital skills they need to thrive in work and life. An open question to our panellists. What have you seen on the ground working with young people and youth around their digital experiences?
We see a lot around the employment space where young people are looking for jobs, and I think it's something like 87% of jobs need ITs now. But just even in the application process of doing online like health and safety questionnaires or training, and also always online applications now like forms. And if you don't have a computer, you don't have using your mobile phone, and it's really hard to do that. I think there's a bit of a difference between the issues for young people and older people. I think with older people, it's something like 80% of older people don't think that they can keep up with technology change. So, and maybe don't see the use of technology. I think for young people, it's more about access really. Yeah.
And I think we've seen some great examples of where young people who do have digital skills have been incredible mentors to people with lower level digital skills. We talk about this concept of being a digital native. So you're born into an environment where everything is digital. So there are some really kind of positive sides, but this assumption that by being young means that you are digitally included is a real farce. And when it comes to using different tools to like you said, get a job or access Centrelink, if you don't have that digital skills and you don't have that confidence to navigate, you are again being left behind. So certainly thank you to the young people that have been stepping up and are involved in volunteer programs to help mentor and take people on a digital inclusion journey. I think it's incredibly important that we're all involved in taking it forward.
Jess, could I
Maria, do you have any thoughts about the young... Oh, sorry, Julian.
Oh, look, just to say that the kinds of issues we've been talking about, say related to affordability, for example, are just as significant or more so for young people as they are for everyone else. And, you know, some of the issues that we have touched on, for example, people's access to devices, are really critical for that age group. People may have skills, but if, for example, you only are able to access the internet through a mobile device, a phone, for example, if you don't have a laptop, there are going to be things that you cannot do. So digital literacy and digital inclusion are not just about a question of whether you are online or not. It's about the kinds of things that you are actually able to do online. And of course, increasingly with work and education and other things, these sorts of critical services we're talking about, just having a mobile device isn't really enough to do everything you need to.
That's right. We have a question from Zach. Zach, thank you so much for submitting a question. For anyone else who would like to submit a question, you can go to sli.do #digital literacy. Zach has commented that his telco provider gives him an option to donate his leftover data. I believe that is Optus that you must be with, Zach. And he's asking, do these initiatives make a measurable difference? I have a personal view on that, in that I think, you know, this is a shared problem, and I think it's great when we see corporate Australia coming to the table and trying to address some of these challenges with solution. The Donate Your Data program by Optus, I'm not aware of the specifics as to how it works, but I think it's really indicative because it's calling out that there's a problem, that people don't have enough access to data, and there is a pathway for customers like yourself to try and help other people in need. Does anyone else have any examples of where we've seen some really positive contributions to kind of nudge the digital inclusion scale in whatever form it may be?
There was a lot of great telco work early in COVID lockdown last year, from like about April to August. There was a lot of deals of sharing your data or cheaper packages, but they haven't lasted, unfortunately. And I think they're really good. I guess I come from a place where I'm still 2 steps back at that foundational level of how does someone know someone that's got data to share it with them. It's let alone have a contract for data.
That's exactly it. You know, I think most recently Telstra announced that all payphones are free in Australia, which I just think is, while we're not talking about necessarily the internet, but connectivity. If you don't have phone credit, if you don't have data, how are you connecting with the people around you? How are you reaching out for support? We run a website through Info Exchange called Ask Izzy, askizzy.org.au, and that service is around connecting people to essential services. So you can search in your area and say you might need a bed for the night, or you need a free meal. And the telcos in both Vodafone and Telstra have made it free. So if you don't have credit, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you can start to connect to services. So when we start thinking, there is a groundswell of movement to be helping people, but it is addressing these bigger challenges around affordability. People might not have access. So again, perhaps a bit of a band-aid. There is a solution here, but what is the broader problem? And it sounds like, you know, hearing from Julian, affordability is something that everyone in this group is seeing as a key challenge to addressing digital inclusion. A couple more questions that I'm quite interested in. We've got about 10 minutes left till the end of the session. So please, audience, if you're interested in anything, jump in now. I'm interested to kind of think about, when we think about the Digital Inclusion Index, Julian, in the consultations you've had over the past year, you've been talking about how the data might be able to be used by groups like us, or, you know, people who are engaged in the forum today. What do you think that might look like? How can we be using the Digital Inclusion Index data to change or move the needle on this challenge that we are all facing?
Well, I think one of the critical things is to make the data, which is really making the evidence, more accessible and more usable. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter, which group, which community you're particularly concerned with. If there is important evidence there, let's make it as accessible as possible. We can do that in a couple of ways, and that's what we've tried to do with the index for our forthcoming report and for here on, which means that in the past, I'm almost a little bit embarrassed to talk about this actually, Jess, but what we did was we did provide some summary data which people could use, but a lot of our work appeared in kind of classical form in a PDF document that people could download. So it wasn't terribly usable. We tried to make it as usable as possible, but that's the form it took. So what we're doing now is building some interactive dashboards where you can interrogate that data in whatever way you like, so that you can look at a particular part of the country, you can look at a particular group of people, right, and see what the results are. So that's really the first thing we want to do. The second thing we want to do is to open up the index so it's usable as a sort of survey instrument, as a tool for research for communities everywhere. And so we're already starting to talk to people about this, so that you can use the same methodology we use to calculate digital inclusion across the whole population for a specific group or a particular part of the country. So, and then compare those results with our national figures. So they're the two things that I think we need to do, Jess. And we think this will put the evidence really much more directly in the hands of those who are going to use it most.
Fantastic. And thank you, Julian, for your continued work on this and its evolution. On behalf of people working in this space, we're so excited to be able to use it as a survey tool. And I think looking at these questions coming through, thank you to our audience who are so positive and optimistic, and I think, like this group, want to do what they can to help. Caroline has shared that she teaches digital literacy within a business administration course at TAFE. Caroline, thank you for teaching that course. It's so important. She has asked how she might volunteer to teach her skills in her community in a regional area. So what I might do is actually throw to each of the panellists. We also have another question in how I can get engaged in Digital Rights Watch. Would each of the panellists be able to make a suggestion to our audience around, if they want to be involved, if they want to help, what would be a step in the right direction? I'll start with you, Elle.
Okay. So I think one thing that we're lobbying for is free Wi-Fi or subsidised Wi-Fi for public housing towers in Melbourne. And the reason for this is, as we say, unless you've got data connectivity that's affordable, you're just not even in the game. People could contact me if you want to support that. We are advocating that to our state ministers. But basically any skills, like Jess is saying, we're community organisations, we're doing aid solutions, we're punching above our weight. So if you've got any skills in budget bids or, research or whatever, get in contact with me.
Love that. Thank you, Elle. So be part of the community, get involved and see how you can help lobby or contribute to those initiatives. Maria, what do you think would be helpful for people to contribute to? We've just lost Maria for a second, so I might throw over to Sam. Sam, could you share with us your thoughts? How can people get involved with Digital Rights Watch?
So in terms of getting involved with Digital Rights Watch specifically, you can head to our website and, become a member, or you can sign up for updates, or, follow us on social media. We are very active in trying to keep people engaged and informed about digital rights issues, digital inclusion being one of them, but all kinds of other issues as well. But I would also like to echo what Elle was saying. I think getting involved at a community level is really important, and I think that should definitely not be overlooked. And I think that we should also, local governments have a huge amount of power, I think, in terms of how we sort of realize these, these issues on a day-to-day basis. So, obviously we're here with City of Melbourne. Thank you for having us. But like, for anyone can get in touch with their local government and, demand better or say that they see this as an issue and, really raise attention to the issue, because if enough of us speak up, they'll have to listen, right?
Power of the community, power of the voice. Thank you, Sam. Julian.
And I absolutely agree with that. It's about speaking up, and I think it's about also indicating to all levels of government that, our expectations are that they do have responsibilities to deliver better results for everybody. We can do better with digital inclusion, and we should. I think, in terms of whether people are interested in participating in the kind of research or work that we do, tell your stories, share your stories. As we said, digital inclusion and digital literacy are complex problems. They're multidimensional. They affect different people in different places in different ways. So we need to get at that fine-grained complexity in order to really tackle it for everyone. So as far as the index goes, as we said, we're releasing a new version in a month or so. Please use it and tell us what you think. I do think that a lot has come out of the discussion today, and I think if there's one other area where I'd really like to see us talking more to the telcos, to NBN, and to government about, is this question about getting hold of affordable devices for people. That's a really critical one. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Julian. Maria, we'll come back to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. If anyone is have a ability to help, like literacy, so like Telestra, Dodo, anything, if they did good deal with the community, especially, that is great. And especially literacy, it is good with the digital. Yeah.
Fantastic. I keep hearing this kind of concept of a whole of community partnership. We're all in it together. We need people like you who are offering their help, and the audiences here. We have this incredible group of experts in the digital inclusion space. We've spoken about the need for local government, federal government, state government, for corporates. We all need to be addressing this issue together. And I think when we think about these key measures that Julian spoke about at the outset, access, affordability, and ability, it does seem to me from this conversation that affordability is a big challenge. So, we're throwing out the gauntlet. We need affordable data plans for people to be able to connect. And of course, to have that connection matched with key digital skills. These are very important issues of our time. We've discussed it as a human rights issue. Sam, thank you for presenting that perspective. I think that we are making a dent on this, but there is a lot more work to be done and a lot of opportunity out there for us to be making a significant impact collectively. Thank you so much for joining us for this Melbourne Conversations event. City of Melbourne runs these events on the third Wednesday of every month. The next conversation you'll be tuning into is about global food systems and how processed foods are impacting our food systems. You can see the details of future events by simply searching Melbourne Conversations on the City of Melbourne website. Don't forget to subscribe to this Melbourne Knowledge Week YouTube channel to stay up to date with Melbourne Conversations events. There's also a link in the new YouTube chat to a survey. The City of Melbourne would love to hear from you. As we go to wrap up, I'll ask each of our panellists for a final summation of their conversation today, and then we'll bid you farewell. I'm going to pass straight over to Sam.
Digital inclusion and digital literacy is a human rights issue, and we all have a role to play in that. The flow-on effects are potentially huge in terms of not just exacerbating inequality, but also misinformation online and how we deal with that. The robustness of our public debate and public discussion and how that impacts our democracy, and overall just how we interact with technology and how technology impacts us.
Thank you, Sam. Maria.
Yes, that is great. The technology in digital, it's very important now as a community member. If I talk, that is, we know it after this COVID came, we learn a lot also how is important. We learn of it. So, yeah, that is great.
Thank you, Maria. Elle.
For me to finish up, I'm going to introduce you to Fatima. I got a call from Fatima during lockdown last year. She was homeschooling with 3 children. She said, "Al, I don't know what to do. We've only got a mobile phone. What I'm doing is I'm recording audio capture of their homework and uploading it to the teacher at the end of the day. And I'm just terrified that my phone's going to ring and it's all going to go wrong." And I think it's just remembering it's not just about line to do yoga, and which is really important, and we all need that. It's also about survival.
Thank you, Elle. Julian.
Thanks, Jess. I mean, I suppose what I'd say is that we're talking a lot now about how we rebuild Australia and make it a better place after the pandemic. I really do hope that digital inclusion can and must be an integral part of that strategic planning and thinking that has to happen now.
Absolutely agreed. And so from all of us on the panel and from the City of Melbourne, I think we can close thinking of Fatma and the challenges that she faced last year and what we can do as a collective to better serve people all across Australia to improve their digital skills. Thank you again for joining us today. Goodbye.